Play it, Michael." Mrs. Hamilton's voice rang across the room with an edge of impatience. Michael's fingers hovered above the piano keys, a brief hesitation betraying his calm demeanor. The whole class had been watching, waiting, their murmurs lingering in the air like an unspoken challenge. Mrs. Hamilton, an older woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for demanding excellence, stood beside the grand piano, arms crossed tightly. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her thin lips barely curled into a smile as she watched the boy. Michael had always been the quiet one, the one who faded into the background. At 14, he wasn't the best at anything other than blending in. He didn't speak much, kept to himself during recess, and was often mistaken for shy, even though it wasn't shyness that made him retreat. He had a gift, but it was one he kept to himself, a perfect, unyielding sense of pitch. Every note, every chord, every melody that he heard fell into place like puzzle pieces in his mind, forming a picture that no one else could see. He wasn't a musical genius, at least that's what he told himself. But if anyone ever knew the truth, they might think otherwise. Mrs. Hamilton, for all her impressive credentials, didn't know this about him. She thought Michael was simply another student, one who couldn't quite keep up with the lessons. She had no way of knowing that he could hear music in a way no one else could, that every note she played on the piano, no matter how complex, was perfectly clear in his mind. He'd never revealed it to her. It wasn't like he could just casually mention, "Oh, by the way, I have perfect pitch," without sounding ridiculous. "Michael," Mrs. Hamilton repeated, her tone laced with a hint of sarcasm. "You do know how to play the piano, don't you?" The room quieted, the weight of her words sinking in. Michael could feel his classmates' eyes on him, some curious, others skeptical. He had always been the student who sat at the back, rarely called upon. No one ever expected much from him, and that suited him just fine. It wasn't that he was lazy, but rather that he was careful not to draw attention, careful not to reveal too much of himself. In truth, he didn't need to be perfect, he just needed to stay unnoticed. But now, in front of the class, with Mrs. Hamilton's eyes burning into him, he couldn't avoid it. His hand trembled slightly as it lowered to the keyboard, the cool touch of the ivory keys both comforting and unnerving. He could play anything. He could hear the sonata in his mind before his fingers even touched the keys. But Mrs. Hamilton had no way of knowing this. To her, he was just another struggling student in her 8th grade piano class, one of many who never quite measured up. "Play something, Michael. Impress us," Mrs. Hamilton urged, her voice cold, as if daring him to fail. The challenge hung in the air, a challenge that Michael wasn't about to back down from. He glanced at the sheet music Mrs. Hamilton had placed in front of him, the notes black against the white page. It was a sonata, a piece far beyond what the class was supposed to be learning. He recognized it immediately, a complex arrangement that most students couldn't even dream of playing. Mrs. Hamilton's smile widened as she watched him, clearly thinking he'd be overwhelmed by the task. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. Michael's fingers rested on the keys, and with a single breath, he began. The room fell completely silent. As the first notes left his fingertips, they filled the space with a rich, full sound that felt almost too perfect. It was effortless for Michael, each note coming to him naturally, instinctively. The students' murmurs faded into the background as they watched him, unsure of what was happening. Mrs. Hamilton's expression remained unchanged, though a flicker of surprise flashed across her face as she heard the flawless execution of the sonata. She had expected him to falter, to make a mistake, to give up. But instead, the notes spilled from his fingers like water, fluid and graceful, each transition seamless. Michael could feel the energy shift in the room, the stunned silence pressing in on him. It was the moment he'd been both waiting for and dreading. As he played, he could hear the melody as if it were already inside his head, each note perfectly aligned, each pause perfectly timed. To him, it was simple. He could hear the entire piece in his mind before he played it. His fingers followed the music without thinking, each note effortlessly blending into the next. The students, once doubtful, now leaned forward, their eyes wide with shock. Even Mrs. Hamilton, who had once been skeptical of his ability, seemed to falter. She stood still, frozen by the power of the performance. The sonata was one of the most challenging pieces in the repertoire, yet Michael made it seem like child's play. His hand moved across the keys, unhurried, but with a precision that was unmistakable. But this wasn't about the music anymore. It was about something deeper, something that Michael knew would change everything. He wasn't just playing the sonata. He was showing them all, including Mrs. Hamilton, something they hadn't expected to see. The quiet kid from the back of the class wasn't so invisible anymore. The sonata continued, the notes now filling every inch of the room, reverberating in the walls and in the hearts of the students watching him. Michael didn't need to look at them to know their reactions. He could hear their awe in the silence, their disbelief hanging in the air with each note he played. And then, just as the final chord approached, he slowed his hands, allowing the last note to hang in the air for a moment longer than it should. The room was still. Michael slowly pulled his hands back from the keys, his fingers lingering in the air for a moment. He wasn't sure what would happen next. Would they be amazed? Would they mock him? He didn't know. But for the first time, it didn't matter. The performance was over, and the room was filled with nothing but the aftermath of his brilliance. And then it came. Well, that was unexpected, Mrs. Hamilton finally said, her voice softer than before, though still laced with a hint of disbelief. The room remained quiet, save for the faint rustling of students shifting in their seats. Michael sat still at the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys, as if he hadn't just performed a flawless sonata that had stunned everyone in the room. His heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let it show. He could feel their eyes on him, each pair scrutinizing him, analyzing what they had just witnessed. It was unnerving, yet in some strange way it felt freeing. Mrs. Hamilton's gaze was still fixed on him, a strange mixture of surprise and admiration in her eyes. But there was something else there too, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just disbelief. It was almost like she had been proven wrong in a way she wasn't quite prepared for. Well, she finally repeated, her voice softer but still carrying that edge of authority. I have to admit, I didn't expect that. Michael didn't respond. He simply nodded, his eyes still fixed ahead, not daring to meet her gaze. He had done it, he had proven his point, but part of him wasn't sure how to feel about it. There was a part of him that wanted to slip back into his usual spot at the back of the class and disappear again. But that wasn't going to happen now. Mrs. Hamilton took a step forward, still processing the performance she had just witnessed. That was extraordinary, Michael. I had no idea you could play like that. She paused, her voice shifting slightly, as if trying to figure out how to phrase her next words. But why haven't you shown me this before? Why haven't you played like this in front of the class? Michael hesitated. The truth was, he had never really seen the point in showing anyone his ability. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy music, he did, but playing in front of others had always felt like a risk. Being perfect wasn't something he wanted to flaunt. It didn't fit the image he had built for himself as the quiet, invisible student. He had kept his ability to himself, believing that it was better to stay under the radar than to risk being singled out for something that made him different. But now, in the wake of Mrs. Hamilton's challenge, it felt as though the very thing he had kept hidden for so long had been dragged into the light, and he wasn't sure if he could take it back. I don't know, Michael finally mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think it mattered. Mrs. Hamilton's brow furrowed, clearly trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. It matters, Michael, she said, her voice firm. You have a gift, a rare gift, and it's not something you can keep to yourself. People need to see this. They need to hear it. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers nervously tapping the side of the piano. He wasn't sure what to make of her words. The room around him seemed to close in, the reality of what had just happened settling in. He had been exposed, and once something like that was out in the open, there was no taking it back. The students had started talking amongst themselves, whispering excitedly, their voices rising in volume as the shock of his performance wore off. Michael could hear snippets of their conversation, some still incredulous, others just beginning to understand what had happened. He really did it? He played it perfectly. No way, he's amazing. I didn't even know he could play like that. Did you hear how fast his hands were moving? Like he was born to play. Michael wanted to shrink into the piano bench, to disappear again, but it was impossible. The attention was already on him, and there was no escaping it now. He could feel their stares, their judgment, their admiration. All of it wrapped up in a single moment. Mrs. Hamilton stepped back from the piano, her arms now uncrossed, her posture more relaxed, but still poised. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, as if trying to decide what her next move should be. I'm going to be honest with you, Michael, she said after a long pause, her tone changing again, this time softer, more thoughtful. I've been teaching for a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. You have real talent, and I don't know why you've been holding back. She met his eyes then, her gaze direct, unyielding. But you can't keep hiding it. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're wasting potential by staying in the background. You can do more. You should do more. Michael swallowed, his throat dry. Felt like too much too soon. Her words were heavy, laden with expectation, and it wasn't something he was ready to handle. He wasn't sure what she wanted from him, but he wasn't ready to be thrust into the spotlight, to be forced to prove himself again and again. Don't you want to challenge yourself? Mrs. Hamilton asked, her voice softer now, but still carrying that note of insistence. Don't you want to see what you're really capable of? The words hit him like a wave. The truth was, he did want to see what he was capable of. He wanted to know just how far his talent could take him, but the thought of stepping outside the comfort of his quiet, unnoticed existence terrified him. I don't know if I can, Michael said, the vulnerability in his voice surprising even him. Mrs. Hamilton gave him a small, understanding smile. I'm not asking you to leap into it right away, but you can't keep playing small. Not when I know what you're capable of. The class had mostly quieted down now, the students watching Michael and Mrs. Hamilton intently. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, as if they were all waiting for Michael's next move. I want to help you, Mrs. Hamilton continued, her voice steady. There's a program, a special piano competition, coming up next month. I think you'd be perfect for it. It's competitive, it's intense, but you could do it. If you let me help you, you could win. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Michael looked at her, his mind racing. Piano competition. The very thought of it made his stomach twist. But somewhere deep down, a spark of something, hope, perhaps, or desire, flared up. Could he really do it? For the first time, the possibility of something bigger than his small, quiet world seemed within reach. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to take the first step. The next few moments felt like a blur. Michael's mind raced as Mrs. Hamilton's words echoed in his head. A piano competition? He'd never even considered it before. The very idea of putting himself out there, of being seen, felt like an insurmountable challenge. His whole life had been about staying unnoticed, blending into the background. Now, suddenly, everything was shifting. He could still hear the faint whispers of his classmates, their voices filtering through the haze of his thoughts. They were talking about him, discussing his performance, trying to piece together what had just happened. Some of them sounded amazed, others skeptical, but all of them were interested. Michael wasn't sure if he liked it. I don't know, he said quietly, his hands still resting on the keys of the piano. The words came out almost as a question, as if he was still trying to process everything. I've never done anything like that before. Mrs. Hamilton gave him a knowing look, her eyes softening for just a moment. And that's exactly why you should try. You've never pushed yourself beyond what you're used to, Michael. You've been holding back, but you're capable of so much more. He didn't answer. What could he say? The truth was, he was terrified. Terrified of what would happen if he stepped out of his safe, quiet world and into the light. What if he failed? What if everyone realized he wasn't as perfect as he seemed? What if he couldn't live up to the expectations that now seemed to hang over him like a heavy weight? Mrs. Hamilton's tone became more gentle. Michael, I'm not asking you to be perfect. No one expects you to be perfect. But I believe in you. You have a talent that's rare, and I don't want to see you waste it. Don't you want to see what you can do if you really try? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Michael didn't know how to respond. His mind swirled with uncertainty, with the fear of failure. But underneath it all, a small flicker of something else began to rise. A spark of curiosity, a whisper of possibility. What if he could do it? What if, for once, he could step up and prove to himself what he was capable of? I'll think about it, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Hamilton nodded, her gaze never leaving him. Take your time, but don't let too much time pass before you make a decision. I know you have it in you, Michael. Don't waste this chance. She turned to address the rest of the class, her voice steady but still carrying a note of authority. All right, everyone. Let's give Michael a moment. The rest of you, back to your work. I'll be assigning the next piece for tomorrow's lesson. The class reluctantly shifted their attention away from Michael, the chatter returning to its usual hum. But he couldn't shake the weight of the moment. He had just been challenged in a way that no one, not even Mrs. Hamilton, had expected. And now, he was left with a decision that could change everything. Michael stood up slowly from the piano bench, feeling the eyes of his classmates on him as he made his way back to his seat. His heart was still racing, but he tried his best to hide it. He couldn't let them see how much this all affected him. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, and now more than ever, he needed that skill. As he sat back down in his usual spot by the window, the soft sound of the outside world filtering in, Michael let out a long, slow breath. He could still hear the sound of the piano, the echoes of his performance reverberating in his mind. It had felt so natural, so easy, like the music had been waiting for him all along. And yet, now, with the weight of Mrs. Hamilton's expectations on him, it didn't feel quite so easy anymore. He looked out the window, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze, the world outside calm and serene. He wished he could be like that, calm, unbothered by the storm of thoughts and emotions that swirled within him. But he wasn't, and for the first time in a long while, he realized that maybe he didn't have to be. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. Michael stood up quickly, gathering his things and making his way to the door. He didn't look back at Mrs. Hamilton or his classmates. He just needed to get out of the room, to clear his head. As he stepped into the hallway, the sounds of the school day buzzed around him, students talking, lockers slamming, the clatter of footsteps on the tile floor. But Michael was lost in his own thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. When he got home that afternoon, he went straight to his room, closing the door behind him. His parents were still at work, so the house was quiet. He sat down at his desk, staring at the piano sheet music Mrs. Hamilton had given him earlier. The notes on the page seemed to taunt him, daring him to try something bigger, something more than he had ever done before. He picked up the sheet music, turning it over in his hands, and slowly began to practice. At first, it was just the familiar rhythm, the easy notes that he knew by heart. But then, slowly, he began to push himself, trying the more challenging passages that he had always avoided. He could feel the music in his mind, the way the notes fit together so perfectly, and it was tempting to see how far he could go, to push himself beyond the limits he had set for himself. The hours passed unnoticed as Michael practiced. His fingers moved with ease over the keys, the music flowing from his fingertips like it always had. But this time, there was something different about it. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for something else, something bigger, something that could change everything. The thought of the competition still lingered in the back of his mind, but it wasn't as scary as it had been earlier. It was still intimidating, still uncertain, but now, there was a part of him that was beginning to believe it might be possible. He wasn't sure if he was ready to step into the spotlight, but for the first time, he was starting to believe he could. The next day, as Michael walked into school, a strange feeling settled over him. It wasn't the usual knot in his stomach that accompanied his quiet, unnoticed existence. It was something different. He could feel the change in the air, like a shift that couldn't be ignored. The whispers from the day before still lingered in the hallways, carried on the shoulders of students who had witnessed his performance. He wasn't just Michael anymore. He was the kid who could play the sonata, the kid who could do things no one expected. As he walked through the halls, he noticed more students than usual glancing his way, their eyes lingering just a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't a look of mockery, like he might have expected. It was curiosity, respect even. For the first time, he felt like he was seen, not for his quietness, not for his awkwardness, but for his ability. And it was unnerving. He wasn't sure how to navigate it. He sat down at his usual spot in homeroom, trying to keep his head down, but it was impossible. Everywhere he turned, someone was looking at him, whispering behind their hands. Michael pulled his hoodie closer around his shoulders and tried to focus on the lesson. But his mind wasn't on the words being spoken. It was on what Mrs. Hamilton had said yesterday. The competition, the challenge. What if he actually did it? The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, and Michael made his way to the music room. His stomach twisted with nerves. He had been avoiding the conversation about the competition, hoping it would fade into the background. But the truth was, he couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. As he entered the music room, he saw Mrs. Hamilton standing by the piano, arranging sheet music. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes seemed to soften just a little when she saw him. She didn't say anything at first, just gave him a small nod, acknowledging his presence. But he could see that she was waiting for him to make a decision. "Michael," she said after a moment, her voice calm but expectant. "Have you thought about what we talked about?" Michael swallowed hard. He wanted to say no, to tell her that he wasn't ready, that it was too much for him. But something inside him stopped him from saying it. Instead, he nodded, his fingers nervously twitching at his sides. He could feel his heart rate quicken, the anticipation building up inside him. "I've thought about it," he said quietly. "I'm not sure I'm ready, but maybe I'll give it a try." Mrs. Hamilton's expression softened into a smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile that was full of pride or joy. It was the kind of smile that said, "I knew you could do it. You don't have to be perfect, Michael," she said, her voice low and reassuring. "You don't have to win, but I know you can do this. You've already proven that you have something special. All you need to do is trust yourself." He nodded again, though his stomach was still in knots. The truth was, he wasn't sure if he could do it. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let the world see him for what he really was. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't go back. Once he had taken that step, once he had made the decision to perform, there was no turning around. "I'll try," Michael said, his voice a little stronger now. Mrs. Hamilton placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a gentle squeeze. "Good. I'm proud of you. You won't regret it." But even as she said the words, Michael wasn't sure. What if he did regret it? What if the pressure, the expectation, was too much? What if he failed in front of everyone? He could already feel the weight of all those eyes on him again, the pressure to be perfect, to succeed. The rest of the class seemed to pass in a blur. Michael tried to focus on the lesson, on the music in front of him, but his mind kept wandering. He couldn't stop thinking about the competition. It felt like an enormous weight pressing down on him, and with each passing moment, the pressure grew heavier. But in the back of his mind, there was a small flicker of excitement, too. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to prove to himself that he could do more than just hide. When the bell rang for lunch, Michael grabbed his things quickly, his mind still racing. He needed to get away, to clear his head. But as he walked down the hallway toward the cafeteria, he couldn't help but notice the way students glanced at him as he passed. It was subtle, just a fleeting look, but it was enough to make him feel exposed. The quiet, invisible Michael was gone, and in his place was someone new, someone they all seemed to want to understand. As he sat down at his usual spot in the cafeteria, he tried to eat his lunch, but his appetite had completely disappeared. The noise of the cafeteria, the chatter of his classmates, all seemed distant, like he was listening from a different world. He kept replaying Mrs. Hamilton's words in his head. "You have something special." It felt surreal. How could he have something special? He was just Michael, the quiet kid who sat in the back of the class and played the piano by himself. What did Mrs. Hamilton see in him that he didn't see in himself? The rest of the day passed in much the same way, students watching him, talking about him, but he tried to block it all out. The only thing that mattered now was the competition. He had made the decision. There was no going back. That evening, as he sat at his piano at home, Michael closed his eyes and let his fingers hover above the keys. He had already practiced the sonata, of course, but now, with the competition looming over him, he needed to dig deeper. He needed to push himself, to find something within himself that he didn't know was there. He played a few warm-up scales, then began the sonata again, but this time, it felt different. The music seemed to flow more easily, more naturally, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside him. For the first time, he didn't feel the weight of others watching him. He didn't feel the pressure to be perfect. Instead, he just played, the music filling the room around him. And as the last note rang out, Michael felt something he hadn't expected: peace. The days leading up to the competition blurred together. Each morning, Michael woke up with a mix of anticipation and dread, the knowledge that he was about to step into a world he had never allowed himself to enter slowly sinking in. But each night, as he sat at the piano, the tension seemed to fade. The music, familiar and comforting, had become his escape, a place where the outside world, with its pressures and expectations, couldn't reach him. It was just him and the keys, a perfect harmony that made everything else feel distant. At school, the whispers continued. His classmates didn't make fun of him. If anything, they treated him with a quiet reverence now. It was as if they were all waiting for something, some grand revelation. They had seen the potential in him, but they weren't sure what he would do with it. Michael, for the most part, kept to himself, avoiding the curious stares. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He had never wanted that, but it was becoming impossible to hide. Mrs. Hamilton seemed to be everywhere, pushing him gently, encouraging him, offering advice. Every time he passed her in the halls, she would offer him a nod or a smile, and for some reason, Those small gestures made the pressure feel even heavier. It wasn't just about the competition anymore. It was about something more, something he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. "Have you practiced today, Michael?" she would ask, her voice gentle but insistent. "I did," he'd reply, though the words felt hollow. What he didn't tell her was that sometimes, even when he played, the weight of her expectations made it harder to breathe. That morning, the day before the competition, Michael sat in his room, staring at the sheet music in front of him. His fingers hovered above the keys, but this time, something felt different. The music no longer flowed as easily as it had in the past few days. Felt distant, like something he couldn't quite reach. He tried to play through it, pushing himself to focus on the piece. The notes weren't coming out as perfectly as they had before. His fingers faltered. He played a wrong note and then another, the sound echoing through the quiet house like a mistake he couldn't take back. Frustration bubbled up inside him, and before he knew it, he slammed his hands down on the keys, the harsh sound filling the room. "Why can't I just do this?" he muttered to himself, his chest tightening with the weight of everything he had been trying to avoid. He stared at the sheet music again, the notes staring back at him, mocking him, challenging him. He wanted to go to the competition to prove he could do it, but every time he tried, the fear crept in. What if it wasn't enough? What if he failed? What if, in front of everyone, he wasn't as perfect as he'd always seemed? The silence in his room was suffocating now, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. He thought back to the first time he had sat at the piano, how it had felt so natural, how the music had come to him without effort. He wished he could feel that now, wished he could simply play again without all the weight of everyone's expectations hanging over him. A soft knock on his door broke his thoughts. Michael glanced up, startled. It was his mom, standing in the doorway with a gentle smile on her face. "You okay, honey?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Michael didn't answer at first. He just looked down at his hands, still resting on the piano keys. "I don't know if I can do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough?" His mom stepped into the room and sat down beside him on the edge of the bed, her presence calm and steady. "You've always been good enough, Michael. From the very beginning you've had a gift. But this isn't about being perfect. It's about you doing something you love, something that makes you happy." He shook his head, still unsure. "But what if they don't like it? What if they think I'm not good enough?" His mom took his hands in hers, holding them gently. "Honey, it's not about what they think. It's about you showing up. It's about you believing in yourself. You've been so focused on doing everything right, on being perfect. But sometimes, it's the imperfections that make us human. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be yourself." Michael closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. It felt like a weight was slowly lifting from his shoulders. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been too focused on the wrong things. Maybe he didn't need to be flawless. Maybe it was okay to just try to see where his music could take him without the fear of failure holding him back. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I think I can do it now." That evening, he returned to the piano, his fingers now moving over the keys with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in days. This time, he didn't focus on being perfect. He focused on the music, and for the first time in a long while it felt right again. He played through the sonata with ease, each note flowing more naturally than before. The nerves that had tightened in his chest seemed to dissolve, and for the first time, he felt like he wasn't playing to prove anything to anyone. He was just playing because he loved it. The next morning, the day of the competition, Michael's stomach was still a bundle of nerves. But as he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt and fixing his hair, something had shifted inside him. He wasn't the same person who had walked into Mrs. Hamilton's class weeks ago. He wasn't the quiet kid anymore, the one who hid in the background. He had a gift, and now he was ready to share it. He grabbed his sheet music, took one last look in the mirror, and then walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time he wasn't afraid. The competition hall was bigger than Michael had imagined. The walls, lined with polished wooden panels, reflected the sound of every footstep that echoed through the space. The air was thick with tension, each student preparing for their turn, rehearsing quietly or pacing anxiously. It felt nothing like his quiet practice sessions at home. The fluorescent lights above hummed steadily, casting a sterile light across the rows of pianos that filled the hall. A few parents sat in the back, murmuring to each other, their eyes focused on the young competitors who were about to step into the spotlight. Michael stood at the entrance, his hands clammy and his heart pounding in his chest. The faint scent of polished wood and sheet music mixed with the heavy sense of expectation in the air. He hadn't expected it to feel this real, but it was, and now there was no turning back. He looked around the room, trying to find something familiar. His eyes landed on the grand piano at the front, the one that would be his stage. His legs felt like lead as he made his way toward it, but each step was purposeful, and by the time he reached the piano, he felt a strange sense of calm. Mrs. Hamilton was waiting by the side of the stage, watching him with her usual intensity. She gave him a brief nod of encouragement, her eyes sharp but filled with unspoken pride. "You've got this, Michael," she whispered, almost as if she knew exactly what he was feeling. Michael nodded, taking a deep breath. His fingers itched to touch the keys, to play, but a part of him still wanted to pull back, to retreat. The fear of failure whispered in his ear, a constant reminder of how much was at stake. But this wasn't about anyone else. This was about him. This was about showing up, as his mom had said, and doing what he loved. He sat down at the piano, feeling the familiar coolness of the keys beneath his fingertips. The weight of the moment was still there, but somehow it didn't feel as heavy as it had before. The notes were waiting for him, like old friends calling him home. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next performer is Michael Carter, playing Beethoven's Sonata No. 14, Moonlight Sonata." The announcer's voice echoed across the room, drawing the attention of the audience. Michael glanced up at the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the few parents and fellow competitors who were watching him. Their eyes were on him, but strangely, it didn't seem as intimidating as it had before. He wasn't sure why, but at that moment all he could think about was the music. The rest of the world faded away. He turned his attention to the piano again and took a deep breath. The first note was a simple, steady foundation, and it reverberated through the hall, filling the space with a soft, haunting echo. The sound was deep, a contrast to the sharp nerves in his stomach, but he couldn't deny how much he loved the sound of it. As his fingers moved over the keys, Michael let the music guide him, not worrying about the audience or the competition anymore. He could hear the piece in his head, the melody unfolding before he even touched the keys. Every note was a step into the world he had been hiding from for so long. It was more than just playing. It was about becoming the music, letting it flow through him and express something he had kept hidden for so long. His fingers moved with ease, each note coming out with perfect clarity, each transition smooth and effortless. There were no wrong notes, no mistakes, just the music, filling the room with its rich, familiar tones. The room seemed to grow quieter, the sounds of the other performers fading into the background as Michael lost himself in the piece. He was no longer aware of the audience watching him, or the competition that loomed over him. It was just him and the music, moving together in perfect harmony. When he reached the final movement, the piece started to build in intensity, and Michael's hands began to move faster, more purposefully. The rhythm quickened, his fingers gliding over the keys, and for a moment, everything seemed to align perfectly. He wasn't just playing the notes. He was telling a story, sharing a piece of himself through the music. The audience was silent, captivated by the performance, and Michael could feel the energy shift around him. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The final chord rang out, resonating in the hall, and Michael's hands paused over the keys. The sound lingered in the air, a soft hum that seemed to stretch beyond the walls of the room. For a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. When he lifted his hands from the piano, the silence was almost overwhelming. His heart still raced, but there was no sense of fear anymore, only relief and a quiet satisfaction. The performance was over. He had done it. The audience remained still for a moment longer before the sound of applause broke the silence, and Michael blinked, surprised by the response. His cheeks flushed with warmth as the applause grew louder, the room filling with the sound of appreciation. For a moment, it was almost too much to take in, but then the smiles of his classmates and Mrs. Hamilton's proud expression made it all feel worthwhile. Michael stood, his legs feeling weak beneath him, but a sense of pride washed over him. He had faced the fear, and not only had he performed, but he had done so without holding back. He hadn't played for anyone else. He had played for himself. And in that moment, he realized that was all that mattered. As he walked off the stage, Mrs. Hamilton caught his eye, her smile wide. "That was incredible, Michael. You did it." He couldn't help but smile back, a small, quiet smile that spoke more than words ever could. He had done it. He had taken the leap, and for the first time, he didn't regret it. The moments after the performance felt like a blur. Michael's mind was still swirling, his thoughts racing as he walked back to his seat. The applause had faded, but the echoes of it lingered in his ears, reverberating in a way that felt both surreal and exhilarating. His legs felt heavy as he made his way down the aisle, his body moving almost on autopilot. The seat felt strangely unfamiliar now, like it didn't quite belong to him anymore. As he sat down, Michael glanced around the room, unsure of what to do next. His classmates were still buzzing with excitement, talking amongst themselves, but there was a new energy in the air. They weren't whispering behind their hands anymore. Their conversations were louder, filled with admiration and wonder. He could feel their eyes on him, and for the first time it didn't bother him. It wasn't mockery, it was respect. Mrs. Hamilton was at the front, speaking to one of the judges, but her eyes kept flicking back toward him, a subtle smile playing on her lips. Michael's heart swelled a little at the sight. For the first time, he didn't feel like the invisible kid. He felt like someone who had stepped into the light and wasn't afraid to stay there. The other competitors went up one by one, but Michael's thoughts kept drifting back to the performance, to how it had felt to finally let go and just play, without the weight of fear or expectation. He realized, for the first time, that he didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to hide behind the music. He just had to let it be what it was, his unique and his alone. As the last competitor finished their performance, the room began to settle down. The judges moved to the front of the room to announce the results, but Michael wasn't thinking about that. He wasn't thinking about winning or losing anymore. It had stopped being about that a long time ago. "Thank you to all our performers," the head judge said, his voice clear and warm. "You've all done wonderfully today. We've seen incredible talent, and it's a pleasure to watch such dedication and skill." The words barely registered to Michael. He was still lost in the quiet triumph of his own performance, letting the hum of the room wash over him. But then, the judge's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. "We'd like to take a moment to acknowledge one performance that particularly stood out today. A young man who demonstrated not just technical skill, but true emotional depth in his playing." The judge paused, and Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Michael Carter, would you please join us at the front?" The room seemed to freeze for a second, the weight of the moment settling in. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Was this really happening? He had done well, but he hadn't expected this. He had been afraid of just making it through, of simply playing his best, not of being singled out. But here he was, the attention of the entire room now squarely on him. He stood slowly, his legs still unsteady, and made his way to the front. As he walked toward the judges, he could feel the eyes of every student in the room on him. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, there was something strangely liberating about it. This was no longer a moment of fear. It was a moment of realization. He had done it, and now he was standing here because of it. The judge smiled warmly at him as he reached the front. "Michael," the judge said, his voice full of praise, "we were all deeply moved by your performance. You played not just with your fingers, but with your heart. That's something rare. It's not just about hitting the right notes. It's about telling a story, and you did that beautifully." Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. He hadn't been playing to impress anyone. He hadn't been playing to show off. He had just been playing to express something that had always been inside him, something he hadn't known how to show before. The judge continued, his voice filled with admiration. "We are pleased to announce that you've earned a special recognition for your performance today, Michael. It's not about the competition, it's about the music. But I believe you have a bright future ahead of you. Keep playing, keep challenging yourself. You have a gift that can take you far." Michael stood there, speechless, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The applause erupted again, this time louder and more genuine, and Michael felt his heart swell with a strange mix of pride and disbelief. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider in this room. He was part of something now, something bigger than himself. He turned toward Mrs. Hamilton, who stood at the side of the room, watching him with a proud smile. He could see the approval in her eyes, and it made everything feel real. She had believed in him even when he hadn't believed in himself. As the applause continued, Michael stepped down from the stage, still trying to process everything. His classmates were clapping, nodding at him with smiles, and even offering congratulatory words. He was no longer the quiet kid who sat at the back of the room. He was Michael Carter, the boy who could play the piano like no one else. The rest of the day passed in a daze. Michael tried to go through the motions of the normal school routine, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the performance, to the way the music had felt in his hands, to the way the room had responded to him. He wasn't just Michael anymore. He was someone who had been seen, someone who had proven something to himself and to the world around him. When he got home that evening, he walked into the kitchen where his mom was making dinner. She turned as he entered, a smile spreading across her face when she saw him. "How did it go, honey?" she asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Michael didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He hadn't won any official prize. He hadn't earned anything more than the recognition that he was capable of more than anyone, including himself, had ever realized. But that, he thought, was enough. "It went well, Mom," he said softly. "Better than I thought." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride. "I knew you could do it." And for the first time in his life, Michael truly believed it. The weeks following the competition passed in a whirlwind. Michael's life had shifted in ways he hadn't expected. His classmates treated him differently now, not with the quiet indifference they once had, but with respect and a kind of awe. It was as if he had stepped out from the shadows and into a new version of himself, one that wasn't defined by his silence or his reluctance to be seen. Each day felt new. It wasn't just the recognition from his peers. It was the way he started to look at himself differently. He found himself walking through the hallways with his head held a little higher, his steps more confident. The fear that had once shackled him, the fear of being exposed for something more than the quiet kid, was slowly dissipating. In its place, there was a growing sense of pride, but also something deeper, a sense of possibility. He had always known he could play the piano, of course, but it had always been more of a private escape for him, a way to retreat into his own world where nothing could touch him. Now, the music wasn't just for himself anymore. It had become a way to communicate, to connect with others in ways he never thought possible. One afternoon, Mrs. Hamilton called him to her desk after class. She had been acting differently since the competition, and Michael could feel it every time they spoke. Her eyes no longer held just the sharpness of a teacher's assessment but something more, a quiet understanding, a recognition that he wasn't just another student. "Michael," she said, her voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of something important. "I've been thinking about your performance, and I wanted to ask you something." Michael raised an eyebrow, his heart skipping a beat. He had been waiting for this conversation, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to expect. "Sure, Mrs. Hamilton," he said, trying to keep his tone casual, though his palms were starting to sweat. "What's up?" She gave him a small, knowing smile before speaking again. "I've been talking to some colleagues about you. Your performance at the competition. They were all very impressed. And I think it's time you pushed yourself further, Michael. I think you're ready for something more." Michael felt a jolt of nervous energy shoot through him. Something more? What did she mean by that? "More?" he echoed, his voice betraying the uncertainty he was feeling. "Yes," Mrs. Hamilton said, her tone steady. "I've been speaking with a few people at a local conservatory. They have a special program for students like you, students with exceptional talent. It's a rigorous program, and it would require a lot of commitment, but I truly believe you have the potential to thrive there. You could study with some of the best instructors, Michael, could take your skills to a whole new level." Her words hung in the air, their weight settling on him like a thick blanket. The idea of it, of leaving behind his quiet, familiar life and stepping into something so demanding, terrified him. But at the same time, there was a spark of excitement, a flicker of curiosity that he couldn't quite ignore. "You really think I could do it?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Hamilton looked at him, her gaze soft but unwavering. "I've seen what you're capable of. You have the gift, Michael, and now it's time to see what you can do with it. But the decision is yours. It's a big commitment and it won't be easy. But I believe in you. You just have to believe in yourself." Michael sat there, the weight of her words sinking in. For a moment, all he could do was stare at the sheet music on the desk in front of him. His fingers itched to touch the keys, to let the music take him somewhere beyond the confines of his small world. But the thought of stepping into a new world, one where he would be surrounded by other prodigies, felt like too much. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he failed? But as he thought about it, a new sense of clarity began to form inside him. He had spent so long hiding his talent, staying in the background, afraid of what others might think. But he wasn't that person anymore. He had stood in front of an entire room and played the most challenging sonata without hesitation. He had proven to himself that he could do more. Now, he had a choice, to continue playing small or to step up and see just how far he could go. Mrs. Hamilton watched him closely, sensing his internal battle. "You don't have to decide right now," she said gently, "but think about it. This could be your chance to truly challenge yourself, to see what you're capable of." Michael took a deep breath, the air feeling a little lighter than before. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as strong as it had been. He was starting to realize that fear didn't have to stop him, could coexist with his desire to grow, to become something more than he had ever imagined. "I'll think about it," Michael said, his voice steady now. "Thank you, Mrs. Hamilton, for believing in me." Her smile widened, and for the first time, Michael saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before: pride, but also trust. She trusted him to make the right decision for himself. As he walked out of the classroom later that day, his mind was buzzing with possibilities. The idea of studying at the conservatory still felt overwhelming, but he wasn't as scared of it as he had been. For the first time, he could see a future where he was more than just the quiet kid. A future where he was someone who could use his talent, who could share his gift with the world, and maybe even inspire others along the way. Michael didn't know exactly what the future held. He didn't know if he was ready to take the next step, to dive into the uncertainty that awaited him. But for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope for the future, hope for his music, and most importantly, hope for himself. And that was enough to start with. The decision to apply to the conservatory didn't come easily. Michael spent days turning the idea over in his mind, playing the same melodies over and over again, each note a reflection of his inner conflict. The music no longer felt like a simple escape. It had become a mirror, showing him not just what he was capable of, but also what he was afraid to become. Could he live up to the pressure of such a prestigious program? Could he really handle the rigorous demands it would require? Mrs. Hamilton had continued to check in on him, offering words of encouragement and reminding him that there was no rush to decide. But the more Michael thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't about rushing. It was about facing his fear and pushing through it. His parents, as always, were supportive, but they left the decision to him. They knew that this was Michael's path to choose, not theirs. His mom had sat down with him one night after dinner, when the house was quiet, and had asked him the one question he hadn't wanted to answer. "Michael, do you want this?" she asked softly, her gaze kind but steady. "Do you want to be more than you've ever allowed yourself to be?" He had thought about it for a long time, long after their conversation ended. Did he want to be the kid who faded into the background, or did he want to be someone who took chances, who dared to be more than ordinary? The truth was, he didn't know what it would look like, stepping into this new world. But he had been afraid of the unknown for so long, hadn't he? Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The application was daunting. It required more than just the standard forms. It asked for personal statements, for letters of recommendation, for recordings of his performances. Mrs. Hamilton helped him through the process, guiding him with her gentle but firm approach. She listened to his self-doubts, patiently reminding him that everyone who had ever achieved greatness had once faced the same fears. "It's not about being perfect, Michael," she told him during one of their many late afternoons spent reviewing his application. "It's about showing up. It's about being brave enough to step into the light." His fingers tapped nervously on the desk as he looked over the form. He had never been good at putting his thoughts into words, and the personal statement felt like a daunting task. How could he describe his gift without sounding arrogant? How could he explain that music wasn't just something he did? It was something he was. But as the words started to flow, he realized something important. The music had always been there, but it wasn't just a part of him anymore. It had become a part of his story, a way for him to express everything he couldn't say out loud. It was the one place where he didn't have to hide, the one place where he could be fully himself without fear or judgment. As he finished writing, Michael realized that this wasn't just about the conservatory. It was about him, about his journey, his growth, his willingness to face the uncertainty ahead. The application wasn't just a piece of paper, it was his commitment to himself. He submitted the application that night, a quiet resolve settling over him. He had done it. He had taken the first step into a future he hadn't even known he could have. The waiting period was agonizing. Each day seemed to drag on, the uncertainty pressing on him like a weight he couldn't shake off. He returned to his routine, practicing more than ever, but there was a constant hum of nervous energy in the back of his mind. What if they didn't accept him? What if he wasn't good enough? What if his moment of success had been a fluke, a brief spark that couldn't be replicated? And then, one afternoon, weeks after he had submitted his application, the letter arrived. Michael was sitting at the piano, fingers stilling over the keys, as he stared at the envelope that had been left on the doorstep. The return address was from the conservatory. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open it, but he couldn't not. With trembling hands, he tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Michael Carter," the letter began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into our advanced music program. We were deeply impressed by your talent, dedication, and the passion with which you approach your craft. We believe you have the potential to make a significant impact in the world of music, and we would be honored to have you as part of our program." Michael's breath caught in his throat as his eyes moved over the words. Felt unreal. He read the letter again, just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. He had been accepted. He had done it. For a moment, everything stopped. The world outside seemed to fade away, and Michael sat there in silence, the weight of the moment settling over him like a blanket. His hands were still on the piano keys, but it didn't matter. He had made it, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to hide anymore. He looked around his room, at the piano that had been his constant companion for so many years, and he realized that this was only the beginning. The future was wide open now, and for the first time he felt ready to face it. Whatever came next, he would embrace it. He would step forward with the music guiding him. When his mom came home that evening, Michael didn't say a word. He just handed her the letter, his eyes shining with pride. She read it, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at him. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I knew you had it in you." And in that moment, Michael realized that she had always known. But now, he knew it too. The days that followed Michael's acceptance into the conservatory felt like a blur of excitement and nervous anticipation. The letter had been the turning point, the confirmation that he was indeed capable of more than he had ever allowed himself to believe. But as the excitement settled, a new set of challenges began to take shape. The reality of what he had committed to, the rigorous training, the hours of practice, the competition with other prodigies, settled into his bones like a weight he wasn't sure he could bear. He spent the next few weeks preparing for his first day at the conservatory. The reality of leaving his old life behind began to sink in. His quiet world of familiarity, where he could play his music in peace without the constant pressure to perform, was slipping away. Now, he would be part of something much larger, something that would demand more from him than he had ever given before. Michael had grown accustomed to being the quiet kid in the back of the class, the one who was overlooked, the one who didn't have to prove anything. But now, he would be stepping into a new world where talent was measured not by how well you could blend in, but by how loud you could stand out. The thought of it terrified him. Still, the music never stopped calling to him. Late at night, when the world outside was silent, he would sit at his piano, fingers brushing over the keys, letting the music wash over him. He wasn't practicing for anyone else. He was practicing for himself. The music had always been his refuge, and now it was more than that. It was his bridge to the future, a way forward into the unknown. The morning of his first day at the conservatory, Michael woke up early. His parents had already left for work, but his mom had left a note on the kitchen table. It was simple, just a few words that spoke volumes. "I'm so proud of you. You've always had it in you, now go show the world." Her words stayed with him as he walked through the halls of his new school. The conservatory was grand, its high ceilings and polished floors intimidating at first, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he walked through the corridors. It was the kind of place where you could almost feel the history in the air, where every corner seemed to echo with the legacy of musicians who had come before him. He wasn't sure if he belonged here, yet he found his way to the music department, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of his footsteps seemed impossibly loud in the quiet halls, and when he stepped into the classroom, he was immediately aware of how different everything felt. His new peers, all more experienced, more confident, were already seated at their pianos, their fingers moving effortlessly over the keys. Michael felt a wave of insecurity wash over him. He wasn't used to being the one who didn't know what to do. He had always been the one who could figure it out on his own. "Ah, you must be Michael," a voice said, breaking through his thoughts. He looked up to see his new instructor, a tall woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. "I'm Professor Adler. It's good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you." Michael nodded, his palms sweating slightly as he held out his hand. "Nice to meet you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Professor Adler's gaze softened. "I won't make you perform today. I know this is your first time here, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but I do want to hear you play at some point. I'm sure you have something to show us." Michael swallowed hard. It was always the same question, what do I have to show? And for the first time he didn't know how to answer. But Professor Adler didn't seem to be waiting for a response. She simply gestured to an empty piano bench. "Please take a seat. Let's get started." As Michael sat down at the piano, he felt a wave of nervous energy rush through him, but he pushed it down, focusing on the music in front of him. He began with a few simple scales to warm up, his fingers moving fluidly over the keys, but his mind was elsewhere. What was he doing here? Could he really keep up with these students who seemed so confident, so sure of themselves? He wasn't sure. Professor Adler watched him closely, her eyes sharp as she took in every movement. Michael's hands trembled slightly, but he focused, keeping the rhythm steady. He wasn't just playing the piano anymore. He was proving something to himself. He had made it this far. He could keep going. When he finished the scales, he looked up to find Professor Adler studying him with a thoughtful expression. "Good. Now, let's see what you can do with something a bit more challenging." She handed him a new sheet of music, a piece he had never seen before. It was complex, filled with intricate rhythms and rapid changes in dynamics. Michael's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't something he was used to playing, but the challenge excited him. This was what he had come for, to push himself, to learn, to grow. He took a deep breath and began. The first few notes were slow and tentative, but as he became more comfortable, his fingers moved faster, more confidently. The music began to flow, each note building on the last, and soon, he found himself lost in the melody. For the first time, he didn't think about the competition or the expectations. He just played. When the piece ended, there was silence for a moment, and Michael's heart began to race again. He looked up at Professor Adler, unsure of what to expect. "Well done," she said, her voice calm but filled with approval. "You have a strong foundation, Michael, but there's much more to learn. This program will push you. It will challenge you, but I think you have the potential to go far." Michael nodded, a sense of quiet pride settling in his chest. The journey had only just begun, and for the first time he was ready to face whatever came next. As he left the classroom that day, his heart was still pounding, but it was no longer from fear. It was from the realization that he had made the right choice. He wasn't just stepping into a new world, he was creating one for himself, and no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, he was ready to walk it.